We've all heard that reading is important, and it's probably something we should all be doing. But how many of us can say that we actually have the habit of reading? How many of us actually like picking up a book, sitting there for hours, and reading it to completion? I would assume it's definitely a minority. There's probably very few of you who actually like reading. I was definitely a part of this group. I never really liked reading growing up, but recently I've learned and developed a few strategies that I've used to get into the habit of reading, and I'm sure you'll find value in them as well. But before we get into that, why should we be reading? For one, reading helps us reduce stress, and we all know how prevalent stress is in our lives. Everyone faces stress, so we might as well find healthy ways to cope with it. Number two, reading can teach us valuable lessons and skills. Personally, I feel like a lot of the lessons and skills I've gotten through reading instead of formal education. And with reading, you can choose what you want to learn, so you have this freedom that you don't find elsewhere. For our last benefit of reading helps us improve our ability to concentrate, and this is a skill that is useful in any task we're given. So, if we want to realize all these benefits, we actually need to pick up a book and read. But this is the problem with many of us. We think it's boring, we don't have the motivation to do it. So I'm here to give you 5 strategies. Let's dive right in. Strategy number 1 is to choose the right book. This might sound really obvious, but it all starts from here. Reading could be a big time commitment, as some of these books are really long and could take a really long time to finish. So it's important that you choose the right book before you make the commitment to it. Start your selection by asking yourself, what do I want to gain from reading this? Maybe you want to learn something new, or maybe you just want to be entertained. Whatever your answer is, make sure you have a purpose before you pick up a new book, and this should narrow down the selection quite a bit. Then you could go the route of choosing a popular book in the topic or genre you want, or you might even search for familiar authors. Personally, what I do, I look at reviews online before I jump into a new book. I like having a general sense of what the public thinks before I devote time to a book, but take individual reviews with a grain of salt because we all know how the internet can be. My next tip is to start with small reading goals. We all hear about these famous CEOs and super successful people that say they read 1 book a day or read 1 book a week. It could be tempting to force a habit like this, but we need to take a step back and be honest with ourselves. If we don't read at all right now, what makes you think you're going to go into reading 1 book a day or 1 book a week? It's just not very realistic or sustainable. This kind of ties back to my previous video on building habits, check it out if you haven't already, where I say you should start with a small goal. With reading, just start with 5 pages a day. This is pretty insignificant, pretty easy to do, pretty easy to get out the way. And since it's a small commitment, you're more likely to do it. You're not likely to skip it if it only takes about 5 minutes out of your day. Not only that, but let's say you start with the goal of just reading 5 pages. If you pick the right book, you're probably going to get hooked to it and end up reading way more than 5 pages. So don't be concerned that you're reading at a slow pace. Tip number 3 would be to read in the correct setting. This is something that often gets overlooked, and it's something that a lot of people don't really talk about when it comes to reading, but you really need to pick the right setting for reading a book. Try to find a setting that's both quiet and comfortable. I try to find a quiet room. Personally, I even like going outside and reading at a park if it's quiet enough. Find a setting that works for you. We're all going to have different tastes in our settings. There shouldn't be any distractions, so mute your device, put your phone in another room if you can. That way your focus is on the book and not what's going on around you. Tip number 4 is another one that I don't see very often, but I find to be one of the most useful, is don't force yourself to finish the book. As I said before, reading could be a big time commitment. So if you're halfway through a book and you don't find it interesting at all, if you feel like you're gaining nothing from it, don't force yourself to finish with it. No one's going to judge you. You're not going to lose anything. If anything, you're just gaining time. What has happened to me in the past is I try to drag on and finish a book, but before I realize it, I end up skipping my reading session as a whole. I end up just losing the habit of reading. Don't let this happen to you. Don't force yourself to finish a book. If you lose interest, move on. I'm not saying you should be jumping from book to book, but there's no real obligation to finish reading a book if you aren't into it. Time is the only asset in life you can never get more of, so don't waste it on a book you can't enjoy. My final tip, and this one's probably a little controversial, is to read on an e-reader. A lot of people swear by reading off physical paper, and I was one of them until recently. A few months ago, I decided to buy an e-reader, and honestly, I immediately fell in love. It's so convenient to have all my books in one device, in a location that I can fit into my pocket. And this convenience will make it more likely that you read during your free time. You can read it on the train, on a bus, at the park, wherever. All you need to do is carry this device with you. Another benefit is that most e-readers have a special e-ink display, which makes it for a much more enjoyable reading experience when compared to a regular electronic device. Personally, it's helped me sleep at night because there's no blue light, so instead of going on my phone at night, I'll just pick up the Kindle, read a book, and end up falling asleep a lot quicker that way. Ever since I picked up the Kindle, I read way more often, and I've heard that this is true for other people who have done the same. I use the Amazon Kindle Paperwhite, but there are cheaper options out there and you should explore them if you're interested. I'll leave an Amazon link for the one I use in the description. Those are 5 strategies I use to get into the habit of reading, and hopefully you found a few of them helpful. Comment down below, let me know which tip you find the most useful, let me know what kind of books you're reading or what books you want to read. Be sure to subscribe. Hitting that subscribe button is the best investment you'll make all year.